What's up, guys? It is the Blue Bloods here, and we're coming at y'all with our first episode of our NFL Draft Corner. It's going to be short episodes that we're going to post on YouTube, so make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel now to catch all these. And we're going to kick it off with the Seattle Seahawks. This has arguably been one of the best teams in recent NFL history. There's been a lot to go on, but sadly, man, we only got 3 draft picks to talk about today, so we're going to have some storylines. But I brought in an expert, someone who covers this team, since I'm not a big NFL guy. We got Sam Belcher here. He is headlines on Twitter. You can find that Twitter account. He's killing the Twitter game way better than I am, so I got to give him a shout out for that. And he also co-hosts a podcast, the Always Compete podcast with Mike DeFran too. Both of these guys are part of the Worst Take Network with me, so it's good to have some people from the network on the podcast. But I want to say I appreciate you joining me, man.
No problem. No problem. Ready to talk some football. It's one of my favorite things, so let's get right into it.
Absolutely, man. So, I mean, we got to start out. So, how did you feel about the season in general for the Seahawks? How did you feel about their free agency? Like, in terms of you, where's the state of this franchise right now?
Well, I mean, obviously, you kind of mentioned it. This is one of the most winning, teams in recent history. So, I mean, the regular season went really well. We had one of our best seasons in a long time. We won a really tough division, and then the playoffs, everybody kind of saw what happened. I think everybody kind of knew the first need going in right as they watched that playoff game. And, in the offseason, we kind of capitalized on that. Offensive line was a big need, and Russell Wilson was unhappy. We went out, got Gabe Jackson and a nice established veteran. And, I think this is one of our most active, best off seasons we've had in a long time. And I'm very, very happy about it. But there's still a couple of needs that could really solidify this football team, especially in the division that we are in now. It's what we need. So.
Absolutely. I mean, to have an offensive line deficit in a division like this with J.J. Watt now, Chandler Jones, Nick Bosa, and what the 49ers are bringing, that's tough, man. But, I have to ask, the Russell Wilson drama is on every single sports channel in America from 6 a.m. with, like, Get Up all the way to 11 with, like, First Take. Is Russell Wilson going to stay, in your opinion? And if he doesn't, what do you expect the Seahawks to try to do to move him? Like, what do you want in return for Russell Wilson?
Well, I mean, first off, I don't think he's going to get traded. I think he wants to be in Seattle. I think the Seahawks want him to be in Seattle. So I think that he's going to stay. But if we were to trade him, if like Russ was to just walk in and say, I'm not going to play this year, I want to be traded, I would need a guaranteed rookie quarterback in return. I would need a guaranteed, like, maybe a top 5 pick or, something like that, just to know that we have a guy coming in immediately. That was kind of the issue with the Bears. We didn't know if there was going to be a guy at 20 or wherever they were picking. So, I feel like that's what we would really need in return. We need a guaranteed future starter to come in and immediately replace Russell Wilson. But, at the end of the day, it just makes no sense for us to really trade him. And, I think he's going to stay for a pretty long time. I think he's got another 2 to 3 years in Seattle. Hoping there's more, but that's really the most I could say at this point. But I don't think he's going to get traded. I think this was a big thing for the media to talk about between the Super Bowl and free agency. And, they always need something to talk about. And they had Deshaun Watson first, and now this was the big story. And ultimately, I think it was a lot of smoke, maybe a little spark, maybe a little flame here and there. But at the end of the day, no real fire to this.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship between Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson, I feel like it's almost so, Brady goes to Tampa Bay and that Belichick Brady relationship was talked about every day. It feels like to me, just as an outsider looking at it, that relationship between Wilson and Pete Carroll kind of replaced the Belichick Brady relationship that people now can't talk about because Brady left. I mean, as someone who covers the team, do you think the relationship is really as strained as some of the media would have you believe?
I think it's somewhat strained. I don't think it's fully strained, and I think that Pete and Russ still have a relationship. But I'm a little. I think Russ really just wants some more power and say in the organization. And I think that really came from him being at the Super Bowl and watching Tom Brady, who's had all this say for all these years, just be able to go out and win a Super Bowl. He had say in the Antonio Brown thing, which obviously he wanted. And he had say in getting Gronk in, who caught 2 touchdowns in the Super Bowl. So I think him really watching that really sparked a fire under him to be like, hey, I need more say, because at the end of the day, Pete Carroll is the top of the top in the organization. He gets final say on everything. So I don't think that it's strained necessarily, but I would say it's a little fractured. There's a little crack at the top that is, kind of that might grow or it might shrink. We don't know.
Right. And, looking at, just the past history of the Seahawks and what they've drafted, I mean, why do you think they're okay with 3 picks? I mean, they traded one for Gabe Jackson. That makes sense. I mean, do you see them making any moves to either move up in the draft or acquire more draft capital? Or do you think they're okay with their 3 picks and kind of staying where they are?
I think me, along with every other Seahawks fan, totally foresees a trade back coming here, because I mean, John Schneider's that's been John Schneider's game. The general manager, he's been doing this every year, no matter how many picks we've had. We had a year, I believe, in 2019 where we had like 15 draft picks. Like that's how he rolls. He will continue to trade back until no teams are ringing the phone anymore. And he kind of, I think his logic is like, well, if I were to buy 15 lottery tickets, I have a better chance of winning instead if I had 8 lottery tickets. I think that's kind of how he thinks. And he's always been a trade back guy. A crazy stat is the Seahawks never, under John Schneider and Pete Carroll, the Seahawks have never had less than 8 draft picks in a single draft. So I feel like we will definitely see a trade back, likely at 56, where we're picking first. I can't really see anything else.
Right. And so, if in case people don't know, no first round picks because of the Jamal Adams trade from New York. In terms of looking back on that trade, was losing those first round picks worth it in the long run? I know your co-host, Mike. I mean, I don't think there's a bigger Jamal Adams supporter in the world than Mike DeFran. But in terms of your opinion, do you think it was worth giving all that up for Jamal Adams? And how was he played for y'all? What would you grade his performance so far in Seattle?
I mean, I think it was definitely worth it, because at the end of the day, the chances of hitting on a guy like Jamal Adams when you're picking at, maybe mid 20s to late 20s are very low, very, very low. And, Jamal Adams is a very generational prospect. He's a guy who can really kind of do everything all over the field. And I think if I had to grade his play in just his first year alone, I'd probably give him a solid B. He didn't do anything. He obviously broke the defensive back sack record, which is really good. I kind of want to see his coverage take a step this next year in the system. But I mean, I think that overall he's kind of gotten a bad rap as of late, just because of he had a couple bad moments that I think a lot of people saw and a lot of people kind of just assumed that way. But overall, I think it was I think the trade was very much worth it. And, there's going to be a lot of people who probably disagree with me, and maybe even some Seahawks fans, but I think that Jamal Adams is a generational player who kind of teams game plan for at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, there's a handful of players I think could go in this category, but when you look at the top 5 most criticized players in the NFL, Jamal Adams is right there with the best of them. I mean, him, Michael Thomas, of course, Tom Brady. I mean, the criticism is outrageous, but let's get to the draft, man. I mean, this roster way better than I do. I'm just a college football guy here. What are the biggest positions of need for the Seahawks in the NFL draft, whether they have 3 picks or they trade back for 5 or 6 picks?
The single biggest need that I see on the roster is center right now. We have our starting center back from last year. He is on a 1-year deal, and Ethan Posick is not an incredible center. He's a guy who will get the job done, so I think that's our number 1 need. Wide receiver 3 is another pretty big need. And, because we don't really have a true established wide receiver 3 on the roster as of now. I'd probably also look at corner. Corner's a pretty big need as well. And I think really after that, maybe look at a couple interior defensive linemen. But I think this roster is almost complete. I think that you might just need a couple building blocks to really cement the team for the future and for the current run,
Right. And, I'm looking, where you guys are drafted. I think, and, for me, looking at it as a college football fan, I know a lot of these, later round guys compared to some of the NFL people, do you expect, so let's just say they stay at 56. do you think they get a late second round corner? Do you think they go O line? If they stay drafting early, where do you think they go first in terms of needs?
If they stay drafting early, I see them likely going for center or corner because, at the end of the day, there's two things here that are really combating. It's making Russell Wilson happy and getting maybe a center later in the second round, or it's maybe Pete Carroll is always a guy who is always attempting to get the best defense possible, and he loves his corners. He loves his corners, his long, lanky, 6'4" corners that he Richard Sherman was like that. Brandon Browner, Byron Maxwell, Shaquille Griffin. The list just goes on. I mean, those are the guys that he really kind of looks at. So I think that those are the two positions that if maybe a guy were to slip who maybe wasn't projected for the late second round, John might be trying to trade back, but I think Pete Carroll might really be trying to push for a guy if he's slipping because of this weird offseason that we've had. I think I would not be surprised to see to see Pete Carroll really push for a guy if he starts to slip down the board at center or corner.
Right. I mean, just looking at these positions of need, how big of a loss was Griffin at the corner spot? That was a guy that just, I don't know all the inside salary cap names for the Seahawks, but for me, that seems like a guy you would want to keep. I mean, to let him slip away was kind of surprising for me. Was it a decision for the Seahawks to let him go, or did they just ended up outbid by the Jaguars who had millions in cap?
I would say that they got outbid. The Seahawks definitely made a push. I imagine that they probably paid in the low double-digit millions for Shaquille, but I just think that Jacksonville had so much money and he's from that area that it was going to be really tough to get him back. I really liked Shaquille in his time here. I don't think he was worth the money that he got at the end of the day. I think 15 million is a little rich for him because he can be inconsistent at times against the top guys in the NFL. So that's kind of I'm not totally upset with the loss of him because although he was a pretty solid number one corner, I would be more than fine saving $15 million to spend elsewhere.
Right. And, looking at the draft, man, is there any prospects that you see in the draft that you're like, okay, this guy's a center, this guy's an interior offensive lineman, a corner, et cetera, that you're like, if the Seahawks land him, we get an A+ for the draft?
Three guys immediately come to mind here. One of the first guys that I've just fallen in love with recently is Creed Humphrey out of Oklahoma. I really like him at center. He's just a big, beefy guy who can really push piles. And in a division where you have Aaron Donald and soon to be JJ Watt, who could play inside, you're going to need a guy who can just really just be a wall at center and just really just take up one whole guy. Creed Humphrey's a one that I really like. A couple others that I would really be interested. Landon Dickerson, I really like his play as well out of Alabama. I feel like the injuries could be a concern, but at the end of the day, I think the potential for him, like he would be a first round pick if he wasn't injured so much, in my opinion. I just really think that high of him. And finally, at corner, I would probably say a guy like Asante Samuel Jr. I really think that he fits the Seahawks mold of a corner and a guy who can just really, really play well. Obviously, his dad was a longtime NFL standout at corner for New England and Philadelphia. I think that if we were to land any of those guys at 56 or somehow even in a trade back, that would just be a fantastic, fantastic draft for us.
And I agree. I mean, I was just on the Nuggets of Gold podcast with Matt. He really wants Creed Humphrey. So that's going to be an NFC West battle if it comes down to you guys in the 49ers.
Yeah.
Dickerson is actually someone, when I contacted you to get on, I was doing some research on y'all's needs and prospects. I think Landon Dickerson, you're right, would be a first-round draft pick this year if he doesn't tear his ACL in the SEC championship. I mean, he was doing cartwheels at the pro day. So it shows that he's recovering. And this is a guy who I believe he only allowed one sack his entire career at Alabama in the SEC against the best defensive lineman in the country. And so you mentioned, and for me, I feel like if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like Pete Carroll kind of has respect for those Alabama kids, those SEC guys. I mean, really, truly, the whole NFL does. I mean, you see it every year. SEC guys get drafted. above and beyond. But to have that Nick Saban disciple, and if there's a one position for me that Alabama usually delivers on, it's offensive line.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, Alabama has had a very rich history of pumping out good offensive linemen. Like, even if you look last year, Jedrick Wills was a total standout for the Browns. Alabama just has a great history, whether it's like really early or late round, great history of just pumping out very quality offensive linemen. And really, so does the whole SEC, just because that grit and grind kind of conference.
Oh yeah, I mean, and then in corner for me, this was a guy that we kind of saw at the Senior Bowl, and it was Afatu Melifonwu
Oh, yeah.
out of Syracuse. I mean, to have a 6'3", 210 corner to come in and replace Shaquille Griffin, that's solid to me. I mean, he's so unique in terms of how big and athletic he is, and he can play safety, he can play corner, slot. And I don't know if you saw his pro day. He ran a 4.4, and his I think it was his 10-yard split was a 1.48. So he could accelerate crazy. But I mean, do you think Melifonwu would fit into that defensive system, and would you be okay with that pick at the late second round?
Oh, I would be more than okay with it. I think at the end of the day, I think Asante Samuel Jr. is the guy who's ready to step in right away. I think Melifonwu, he's a very quality build and prospect, but I think it would be a much bigger risk to just push him into the fire year one. I also like his teammate, Trill Williams. I think Trill Williams is another very solid player who also fits the build, like that lanky, long corner. And their system really fits our system with like the zone, big nickel kind of setup. That's really what we run at the end of the day. So I really like both of those Syracuse corners, and I'd be perfectly fine picking either at pick 56 or in a trade back situation.
Right. And, just with your pulse on kind of how the Seahawks fans are feeling, what prospects they like. If, like, let's just say, I know that the Seahawks are generally a conservative team, but they have draft capital for the future. They have players that they could trade. If they traded up into the first round, is there a player that you think, okay, if we could trade up to get him, he will make us immediate Super Bowl contenders, and like if we can put a package together, we need to go get this kid?
This is a good question. It depends really who we're trading up for and when, because I would think that assuming, we really couldn't move up to like mid first round, I would assume that if we were to trade up, it would be a late to mid, a late first round pick. A guy like a couple of guys who really jump out at me are Caleb Farley and Greg Newsom out of Northwestern, and Farley out of Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
So, both are very, this is a great draft for really long, lanky corners. Like I said, I keep using the term lanky, but that's really the best way to describe Pete Carroll's kind of corner. I mean, you've seen Richard Sherman. So, if we were to trade up, maybe either of those guys are falling into the late 20s, early 30s. Maybe Pete Carroll's like, hey, Tampa Bay, we got a guy and a couple picks from the future here. We can just throw at you, see if you want to take it, and we'll work from there.
Right. I mean, and I think so. I mean, personally, looking at the corner class, J.C. Horn jumps off the board to me. Surtain's probably going to be a top 10 pick. That's probably way off the board. But
Yeah.
Farley is an interesting prospect, though. I mean, you talk about like, hey, can we throw something at the Bucks? Farley just had back surgery. Farley didn't play last year. There's a lot of reports that Farley is going to fall deep into the draft. Possibly he could be that first round slider. Do you think? I mean, so what would you want to package? The roster, y'all's future picks. What would be a reasonable offer that you think you'd be like, okay, we didn't give up too much. We gave up just the right amount for this player.
That's tough because there's a couple players who I could see maybe being packaged into a trade. A guy who I could imagine if we're trading up for an offensive lineman could be a guy like Dwayne Brown at left tackle, who's 36. It wouldn't make Russ happy, but he is in a contract year. Same with our right tackle, Brandon Shell. There's a lot of guys. I mean, Tyler Lockett was the main trade prospect, but he just gotten a major extension, so likely he's not going to get traded. So I feel like a good package would probably be a couple seconds, both this year and in the future. And for players, I wouldn't want to trade Dwayne Brown. I would likely look at That's tough. Probably a guy. I don't know. I don't know any players who we could immediately package into a trade that I'd be super happy with. I just really look into like maybe throwing together, you know, a second, maybe like 2-3 seconds, maybe an extra third, and just seeing if the Bucks or the Chiefs or the Packers maybe take a flyer and just say, you know what, sure, we're just gonna get like 4 future mid-round picks and just, you know, we don't have a ton of needs right now. We're just gonna slide back and let Seattle jump up.
Right. I mean, and there's one player I think he could. So it's just this player is so hard to judge because I've seen people put him in the first round, people put him in the late second, but he's a guy who reminds me a lot of Cam Chancellor, and that's Trevonne Mohrig out of TCU, who won the Jim Thorpe Award. He's been all Big 12 for 2 years now. He allowed 0 catches in their 2 biggest games of the year, under 200 yards receiving. He's fast, he's physical, he's all over the field. I mean, so I don't know what the safety situation looks like. I know you got Jamal, but that second safety spot's open. Do you think a versatile guy like Mohrig could also be someone y'all could look at?
Well, yeah, I mean, Quandre Diggs, who is our other safety, just came off a Pro Bowl in a career year, but he is in a contract year. So he might be demanding after a year like this, he might be asking for 10 plus million. So maybe, you know, and also even if you do extend him, Jamal Adams is mostly a guy who plays up in the box and a guy who essentially plays more of a linebacker role, if anything else. I would not be surprised if Pete Carroll looked at it. He's like, well, Quandre Diggs is on a contract year and we're sitting here. Jamal Adams mostly plays up front. Let's get another guy for the future who can continue to bolster the secondary and continue to let it grow, especially when it's a very young secondary like we have now.
Right. I mean, and so last question here, man, before I let you go. So we're depending on how y'all draft, I know that's a big what if. What are your expectations for this next season for the Seahawks?
I'm expecting another competitive year. I think we've gotten better so far in free agency. I'm just really expecting I'm expecting a team with a better, hopefully a better offensive line. And I'm thinking about a playoff, hopefully a deep playoff run this year. You know, Seahawks recently have had a lot of winning seasons, but haven't been able to put that winning into deep playoff runs. I'm hoping that now with the bolstered offensive line, maybe if we go out and get a guy like Landon Dickerson, and he ends up starting for us year one, or we go out and get a corner like Asante Samuel or Melifonwu, you know, maybe that could be the final puzzle piece that that we're looking for to really allow us to push deeper into the playoffs than we have in recent years. And I'm expecting a solid 11 wins out of this team because I just think that we're that good. I think that it's okay to expect that as the bare minimum with this team.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. From, 2011 or 12 up until now, I mean, it's been consistent playoff appearances, solid years. So I don't think that's too far out of the question. But man, I appreciate you coming on here, kicking off our draft corner with us. Where can our listeners find you, man? Twitter, where can they find the podcast? Anything you want to put out there to our listeners?
So yeah, podcast is anywhere where you get your podcast: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, pretty much anywhere. Anchor. We also have a YouTube channel, which is pretty new. If you guys want to go check that out, it is the Always Compete podcast. Go check it out there. We're gonna be coming out with some draft stuff of our own pretty soon. So if you're a Seahawks fan, you're listening in, maybe go check that out. And on Twitter, you can find me at Decalen Season. A season spelled SZN. So if y'all want to find me, check me out there. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yep. And also, man, both part of the Worst Take Network. As we've been teasing on social media, big things coming there, guys. So stay tuned with all the social media up on that. Make sure to check Sam out. You know where to find us, guys. And as we told y'all, once we hit 100 subscribers on YouTube, man, big merch giveaway. So make sure to subscribe now. We'll be back later with the 2-minute drill, some more Big 12 in 30 days. And we got some awesome teams and people lined up from the Worst Take Network coming on here to talk some NFL draft stuff. But for Sam, myself, guys, and the Blue Bloods, we are out.